Good afternoon, everybody, at least on the East Coast. So once again, thank you, Lightspeed, and the team for giving this opportunity to talk to your group over here at DC Lean and Agile. And thank you, everybody, for making your lunch hour available to hear me out in terms of what's going on with generative AI. So again, we've been, we've been watching this really cool tech unfold since, let me remind you the date, November 30th, 2022. That's when ChatGPT came out. And maybe some of you guys got on board, probably have a paid subscription to ChatGPT or maybe something similar. But that's what's captured all of our imagination. And sorry for this wordy title over here, Wild to Wise, Taming Generative AI. This is an example of ChatGPT's creativity. I could have come up with a simpler title for this deck, but I said, why not? Let's see what OpenAI can give me. I don't know if we have any Costco subscribers or members over here, but if you've been lately to the Costco shopping for a toothbrush, then you probably saw this. This was intriguing for me. Oral-B, this is, it says it's empowered by, it's got some AI in there. And I was curious, and I haven't dug into it. Maybe you guys may want to do this. Like, what is going on with, what is AI doing over here? But you all should feel good if you're using this product. Hopefully you're seeing a better outcome or feeling better using this product because it's now powered by AI. But it's just another example of the hype. And so one of the things that as we step through this presentation, hopefully you all will walk away with some level of groundedness and sanity, saying, hey, there's a lot that's happening fast and furious. And as either product practitioners or agile coaches or engineers or tech leaders, we need to be able to sift through this in a way that makes sense for our context, for our customers, where we're trying to go, right? So I just want to share this example quickly. This is my son, Ari. I've got two teenagers. This is the older one. He's a freshman at Duke. He was over, this is a picture from Thanksgiving. He was over, my wife cooked us some yummy Indian delicacies. But back then, it's the same content I was about to present to another audience. And he was like, Dad, so what are you going to be talking about? I said, I'm going to be talking about how to build AI systems in a responsible way. And he's like, Dad, but everybody already gets that. What is new that you're going to be talking about, right? And so I shared two quick examples with him. And we're in an election year in the US. We've got the presidential elections coming up, and there's a lot of opportunity for AI to cause or distribute disinformation or misinformation. There are a couple of examples that were there late last year where there was a mugshot of Donald Trump out there making the rounds. And yes, that was all doctored. That was AI generated mugshot. It wasn't real. But that's one example. There was another example of Biden bashing the LGBTQ committee. And again, that was another fake news that was generated by AI. So especially in an election year, we know that the havoc AI can create when it gets into the hands of bad actors, of fraudsters. So that's one example I gave my son. I said, hey, there's a lot that's happening out there, a lot of cool tech and tooling out there, but this is where I'm on a mission to help everybody understand how to raise the guard and make sure that we're using these tools in a responsible way. Another piece of data I shared with him and want to share with you all is some research that was done by a survey that was done by Pew Research, which shows the level of concern and anxiety that is growing, that has been steadily rising over the years when it comes to using AI-backed products. So again, a couple of examples of here which lead us to really start acquainting ourselves and getting to know what are some of the tools and practices out there that we all should be thinking about using, and especially in the with generative AI coming to the fore, what does that look like? How is that landscape changing? quickly about my background, you see sort of three columns over here. I've done a bunch of FTE roles, and those are on the left. Sort of most of my grounding when it comes to machine learning, AI happened at Capital One a few years back. I was on the card side of the house. I was the product leader for the card decisioning and authorization platforms. So I learned a bunch over there in terms of what cloud is doing with regards to AI, and then subsequently with the data platforms. I've also done a bunch of consulting, and some of these consulting roles have been with folks from Lightspeed, like George Lively and Raj, who I remember fondly and recall fondly. But my expertise on the right side that you see is really at the intersection of tech, user experience, and business. This is where product comes together. If we have any product managers, product owners, product leaders, product practitioners, you all would be able to relate to this, which is really it's the confluence of these three domains. And so I enjoy doing that. I enjoy being a product practitioner and really thinking about what problems are people trying to solve, whether it's the commercial space or the federal space, and how do we bring tech to solve those problems. And now, generative AI, what role could generative AI, another tool in our toolkit, what role could that be playing in helping solve problems for our customers in a way that empowers them? So I want to hit on the landscape and some basics over here quickly. And I apologize if you are already up to speed with this, but I'm gonna make the assumption that some of us are not. So let me just talk about this. So when we think of ChatGPT, we also have heard things like LLMs. We've also heard of FMs, of foundation models, and AI. Things like ChatGPT or BERT are really applications that are built on top of large learning models. So ChatGPT itself is not an LLM, but it's backed by a GPT 3.5 or GPT 4.0. And so what is GPT 3.5 or 4.0? That is a layer behind that. That is the layer that's numbered number 3. That's a large learning model that has been trained primarily on textual data, right? Now you unfold that and step back a little more. We start looking at something called foundational models. And these are models that are not necessarily trained just for purely text-based use cases or context, but they're trained on unlabeled, large corpus of unlabeled data. This could be, think of it as the Wikipedia or just the internet in general. And then you've got the space of the domain of generative AI, which is a specialized, it's a subset of AI, and it's a specialized field within deep learning, right? We've mostly been familiar with machine learning, which has made great strides over the years when you think of detecting fraud or think of detecting doing underwriting and things like that. But generative AI is a whole different field, which is again driven by deep learning and those principles and practices. Another way to think about this is think of machine learning as being a more deterministic way of doing things. Deterministic means that when you train a model using machine learning, the outcome of that will always be the same. If you run it 1,000 times, you'll get the same outcome 1,000 times. That's why we call it deterministic. The flip of that is what we call non-deterministic, which means that when we give it a prompt or we ask a question, we do it 1,000 times, we're going to likely get 1,000 different flavors of responses. And that's what generative AI is. It's a model that's been trained using unstructured data, unlabeled data, as opposed to machine learning, where everything is highly structured and labeled. So giving you a little bit of more of a technical background when you think of ML versus LLMs and generative AI. Another mental model that you can think about, or you may want to keep in mind when you're thinking about the AI stack, especially generative AI, is this picture over here. It's look at the top right, you're seeing the apps. This is where This is where the chat GPTs and BERTs are playing, right? What's driving the apps are these models. Some of these are closed source models like GPT 3.5 and 4. Some of these are open source models that you can go grab, and there's a number of them out there. Stable Diffusion's out there. Databricks just came up with a model, and there's a bunch of, I think, both Google and Meta have open source some of their models as well. So you can go grab that model and fork it and make it your own. And what's driving all of this is the power of cloud and compute. That is what the underlying structure is. So when you think of for example, cost and economics, there are cost implications for building these systems and applications at each of these layers. Now, you as a practitioner might be operating at a certain level, at a certain slice of this layer. You might be focused as a product person or an engineer, you might be focused on the apps. As somebody who is an ML engineer or somebody who has a PhD in that, you might be focused in the middle layer. If you are working for Google or Azure or OpenAI, you might be at the bottom layer. But when we think of building responsible AI or generative AI systems and applications, that responsibility, that lens, you need to apply the responsible lens at each layer, not just at the app layer. Of course, the app layer or the platform you're using for that, whether that's LangChain or OpenAI SDK or Bedrock or Vertex AI, all those platforms will provide you a set of guardrails and ways to fine-tune things. But if you're operating or offering services or products in the middle layer or the bottom layer, the onus of being responsible and ethical also lies on you to make sure that you have done the right level of things and made the right investments to make sure that the apps that are built on these foundational aspects are going to be built in a way that are reliable, scalable, and accessible.
We have one question from Sudhir. Is foundation model and LLM, are they synonyms?
They're not. LLMs are a subset of foundation models. So once you take a foundation model and you do some training and fine-tuning, that leads you to a large learning model. And LLMs are primarily trained for text use cases and intents. Foundational models could be good, or again, they have certain drawbacks, but they can address text inputs, video inputs, image data. So they've been trained on a number of different things. So that is the big difference between foundational models and large learning models. So again, these use cases that I'm showing up here, none of these should be foreign to you by now. We're using generative AI, and we're seeing that in action either to generate text, to do searches. We're using that being built, leveraged for building chatbots, whether it's a chatbot that's showing up in Spotify if you have that, or in your credit card app, or it could be any number of things, or if you're going into, let's say, if you're accessing an auto dealership, you'll see a chatbot that's probably being driven by generative AI. Text summarization, I use this all the time. Image generation, I use this all the time. Right? And these are, again, very routine use cases. Now we're starting to see use cases and opportunities which are highly complex and specific, which are very domain specific, whether that's in the doctor's office, whether that's in a trader's or investment banker's office, whether that's in oil and natural gas, right? So this very, very complex and nuanced use cases that generative AI is being used for. I'll give you a couple examples of where generative AI has stumped people or has led to poor outcomes or unintended consequences. Here's an example of somebody asking ChatGPT, what is the square root of 4%? Now, you can read through the conversation over here. A normal person, and I was stumped too, a normal response, a logical response, and would on average response would be 2%. And that is the incorrect answer. If you do the math, the right response to this question, the square root of 4% is actually 20%, right? Now, ChatGPT was not trained for this use case. ChatGPT was not trained on solving mathematical problems. You could give it a hand, you could give it a shot trying to do some simple interest problems, compound interest problems, amortization schedules. It's getting better. But this is, again, keep in mind, this is a bit dated. This is an example that's 6 months old. But back then, ChatGPT wasn't trained on solving a simple, I won't say a simple problem, this kind of problem where you're saying, give me the square root of 4%. So the takeaway for you over here is think about the problem you're looking to solve for yourself or for your customer or client, and make sure that you've done the necessary amount of testing in terms of not just that, also you've done the right due diligence in terms of what is the right closed source or open source generative AI or LLM I should be using, because they all come in different flavors. There are very generic and general purpose models available out there, and then there are very domain and function specific models available out there. And as these models and these offerings, both closed and open source, continue to become available. There's a lot more and more being made available every day. So again, be careful what tool you're picking to solve your problem. Another unintended consequence that I came across was a few months back, as this buddy of mine at Google, he's a pretty big deal when it comes to AI. He was able to trick LinkedIn's top voice algorithm. And you, in your LinkedIn experience, you might be also getting hit up by where LinkedIn is asking you to answer some questions and be able to earn this top voice badge. Here's Nitin putting some random responses to the questions. And before you know, LinkedIn tagged him and gave him this top AI voice badge. The point over here is that Nitin was able to break down LinkedIn's algorithm over here and then call out this flaw in terms of the product they had launched. So even the likes of LinkedIn, which is now owned by Microsoft, even you see these big entities that are in this mad rush to be first to market, and they're putting out products out there that they haven't tested, right? But again, there are bad actors out there who can break your system. So again, think thrice before you put anything out there. And we talk about some of the practices to make the testing and evaluation of these products more resilient and more trustworthy as we move forward. I'm going to skip this one. But again, as I talked about, the high stake use cases out there for generative AI are in multiple sectors and industries. If you think healthcare, again, generative AI is making into things like diagnostics, whether that's evaluating MRI scans or X-rays. In insurance, it's showing up in underwriting and fraud. Same thing in banking. In pharma, it's showing up for drug research and testing. The investments most of these verticals and industries are making these days they are making sure that they're hiring the smartest people. So it's not just about getting the coolest tech and platforms out there, but also making sure that we have the necessary human capital, whether they are engineers, researchers, practitioners, product managers. We need to make sure that we have the right cast, the right set of characters out there in our context to be able to solve these important problems. And before we get out there and make a claim that we've solved something important. So again, these high stake use cases will continue to pique your imagination in your walk of life. But again, make sure that you are surrounding yourself with the right people to solve these problems. So what are some of these challenges that we're seeing, especially in the generative AI space? And as I mentioned earlier, the big difference between machine learning applications and LLM or generative AI applications is one is deterministic and the other one is non-deterministic, meaning that ML problems, LM models and use cases will always give you a concrete answer. You run it 100 times, 1,000 times, million times. With generative AI and LLMs, you will get different answers every time. Now, there's ways to fine-tune that, and the techniques to fine-tune that. We'll talk about that. But you can keep that in mind as you move forward, that the predictability of generative AI is sketchy. So you have to really make sure that you're putting the right guardrails in place, you're putting the right fine print in place before you put this up and serve this up to your audience or to your market. These challenges are coming in different ways. We've heard of things like, or experienced things like hallucination. There's information that's outdated. Remember, any of the models, any of the products you're using out there, they were trained 3 months ago or 6 months ago, because the training and retraining of these LLMs is a super expensive and time-consuming process, right? It takes months to train them. It takes hundreds of millions of dollars to train them. Even the likes of Meta and Google and Amazon and Microsoft are not pushing these trained models every week. They're coming out every few months, if not every quarter. You also need to make you have to be careful about age appropriateness of the product that you're going to put out there. Data privacy is a big issue. We've seen a bunch of headlines coming from New York Times and Wall Street Journal where they're talking about that their data is now making into a ChatGPT or BERT, and there are lawsuits out there. IP theft, the toxic nature of the outcome could be another challenge. Plagiarism and cheating, misinformation. So again, there's a bunch of these challenges that we as product builders or consumers have to keep in mind and have to address to make sure that we are not caught off guard, or our products and companies do not get mud in our face because we put something out there that somebody was able to break. One important example that I want to also talk about over here is when it comes to generative AI, it takes the unintended consequences take a whole different dimension when you start considering gender and race. Now, again, remember that unlike ML, where everything is nicely curated and tagged, the data, in generative AI, nothing is tagged. It's unsupervised learning, unsupervised training. And here's an example where an open source model, which is stable diffusion, you can look that up. An open source model some months ago was asked for, hey, can you generate 5,000 images, color photographs of housekeepers? And here's a sample what it came back. What you're seeing over here is a disproportionately biased data towards housekeepers being Asians, dark skin, dark color, right? We know that's not the case, but this is a leading open source generative AI image generation model that's providing this outcome. So again, another example for you to keep your guard up when you're about to use these open source models for personal use or for use for a customer. One last example I want to share over here is data that was run to look at the distribution of women with regards to the professions they're doing. The way to read this graph over here is the y-axis or the zero axis is the normal data that you will see in terms of facts or research out there, or your personal observations. But what you're seeing over here is a swing to the right, where this analysis is showing, has used, again, generative AI, the stable diffusion model, and showing a disproportionately high 12% off when it comes to women of color who are dishwashers or cashiers or housekeepers. On the flip side, on the negative side, you're seeing we know that women make up 39% of physicians and doctors, but over here, it's only showing 7%. So it's off by 32 percentage points when it's analyzing and presenting outcomes when it comes to physicians and doctors. So again, the models out there continue to think that there aren't enough women of color when it comes to physicians or judges or lawyers or politicians, and we know that's not the case. So again, here's another big area where generative AI models could lead to poor outcomes, bad outcomes, if you don't use them in a responsible way, or you don't build them and design them in a responsible way. So what does that responsible approach look like when you think of, hey, what can I bring to my shop? What are the things I could be doing in order to make sure that I'm building systems in a responsible way, in a way that are trustworthy, in a way that are educating and raising the awareness of my audience and my consumers? So this is a 5-step sort of a 5-phase journey that I've come up with, and this is purely based on my experiences from my time at Capital One and before as a product practitioner. These 5 steps are, again, work backwards, and we'll unpack this. Make sure you're being a good student of the standards and frameworks that are being pushed out there, and they're coming from all walks of life, from academia to federal agencies to independent research think tanks. Instrument observability, we'll talk about that. Fail fast, try and break your own product and experiences before somebody else can break that, and then inspect and adjust frequently.
Are there specific types of chatbots that are designed for specific purposes? If so, how do you know what they are designed for?
Yeah. So again, the chatbot that I use most is ChatGPT. So there are, and I've also used BERT a little bit, but when you look at any chatbot, hopefully if they are backed by a reasonable entity like an OpenAI or like a Google or Meta, it'll come with a lot of fine print. I encourage you to read that fine print, read the disclaimers, and read what the purpose or the objective or the goals of the chatbot are. That should give you a lot of information about what is the purpose of that. If you're not seeing that, that should be raising a bunch of red flags in your mind that this is something that is actually there to scrape and grab information from you as opposed to providing a service. Another example is that if you are typically, what happens if you're going to buy a product when it's a paid product or paid like ChatGPT, there's a reasonable amount of assurance and trust that you can come in with, because you know that this entity has taken the steps to train it and put the right guardrails. One last piece to the response is that I haven't used this, but there are specific domain-specific ChatGPTs or products that are coming out there. I mentioned healthcare. I mentioned financial in card and banking. And those are products that are coming out there that are now being plugged into, they're more B2B use cases as opposed to B2C use cases.
Another question, are there new testing tools that can actually ensure that these products are well tested?
Yeah, and I'm going to touch on that as I go to steps 2 and 3 of the approach I'm going to talk about. So let's hold off on me responding to that just yet.
All right. And last question, how is cybersecurity going to be applied to these chatbots being built?
Yeah, great question. I think when it comes to security, you need to, and again, I'm not a security expert, guys, so take whatever I'm saying on that topic or on this topic with a grain of salt. But when it comes to security, needless to say, you have to make sure, or the companies and organizations, the business products have to make sure that the data on which their products would train is protected almost like Fort Knox. So again, we are training our products on a large corpus of data, but at least we have some assurance that our teams have looked at the data and pours hours and weeks and months on the data, so we have a good understanding of what the data is. A bad actor, when you have a security lapse, can inject a malicious body of data. It could be a PDF document, it could be a set of images, it could be a whole bunch of things And next time you train your data, it could be picking up those kind of information or misinformation that you don't want the responses to be picking up. So, as you know, at least from a security point of view, you need to make sure that you have the right guard. I won't say the guardrails. Your infrastructure is secure. It's all behind firewall. It's, you've got multiple levels of security and things like that, so that no foreign data can be injected into your training data set. Number two is also make sure that the front end experiences that you're building, that nobody can come in and insert or transpose or transform somebody's prompt in a way that they can take over that experience, right? Because again, let's say if Maggie, you're trying to interact with ChatGPT, and you have a conversation going on, and if somebody sneaks in from behind and changes the wording or inserts a piece of text in there, that could change the outcome or the response of OpenAI and ChatGPT. So again, those are some experience. So those are some of the things that come to mind from a backend and from a front end point of view that you have to protect yourself, your infrastructure, and your audience from when it comes to cybersecurity. All right, I'm going to keep moving, guys. So the first principle over here, or the first practice you want to think about, is working backwards. So depending on your context and depending on your need or use case, think about what is the end outcome that you're trying to achieve. What is that problem you're looking to solve? What does good or great look like? And then work backwards from that, right? Because as a product person, I always try to think about that. Hey, what is the smallest piece of this puzzle or this problem that I can solve that can give me some assurance with regards to whether I'm solving the right problem, whether I'm moving on the right track, whether I have the right tools, whether I'm thinking this right, whether I have the right assumptions. When you don't do that, there are a couple of things that happen. One is that you're working with tools that might give you some reassurance in first few weeks or first few sprints of that effort, but then it's likely going to go off on a tangent, and then you'll have to unravel and roll back everything that you're doing. So starting with understanding what the context is, who the customer is, what problem you're solving, what does good or great look like for this specific audience is always the first thing. So work backwards from that end in mind, right? This is also going to help you think in terms of what guardrails you should be putting in place, what level of fine-tuning you should be doing with regards to this product. And let me try and explain what does that mean. When you think of guardrails, if you're using Bedrock, if you're using Vertex, think of guardrails as a set of dials that you have that you can dial up or down. We also call them temperature. It's on a scale of 0 to 1. You can raise the temperature or you can lower the temperature depending on the context of the audience. Guardrails could be profanity, could be violence or mention of drugs or guns, things like that. You can raise the temperature up, you can raise the temperature down depending on who the audience is, what the problem is. So those are guardrails. So unless I know the context of the problem, the demographics of my end user, I cannot be saying that. So that's what I mean by starting with the end in mind, really working backwards. Fine-tuning is bringing in formal set of content into my trained data. So earlier I mentioned LLMs are trained on unstructured data. But think about this, I can make it a little more structured by bringing in my own body of content. So if I'm Freddie Mac, if I'm in the mortgage business, if I'm in the underwriting business, I can bring my own body of data along with the unstructured data, bring that in. And when I'm retraining the next time, right, I can have my training algorithms look into this domain-specific data as well. There's another technique that I'll talk about later on, which is called RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, which uses PDFs, images, other specific documents from your domain to do the fine-tuning. So those are some reasons you want to start by thinking backwards. First, Number two is adopting standards. Now, when I say standards, think of this as just like you have SAFe for Agile, right? When it comes to generative AI, there's a ton of standards that are coming from a number of different places. I mentioned a couple over here. There's something that's coming out of Stanford, which is called HELM, Holistic Evaluation Learning Models. There's a bunch of cool information out there which talks about how should you be benchmarking and testing and evaluating the large learning model products and generative AI products you're using, right? You can look that up. Google has a very deep and thorough set of training standards and principles that are mentioned over here. Largely, if you zoom out, they're talking about design for responsibility, conduct adversarial testing, and communicate in a simple and helpful manner. Quickly on number 2 and 3, adversarial testing should not be new to most of us. This is a set of practices that we bring in to break our own products. It becomes that much more important when it comes to generative AI because there are so many moving parts to this tool and these products that you don't know how the end user is going to be using your product. So to the extent that you can play the bad actor role and do this adversarial testing or break testing, you can then catch those edge cases or nuances and then correct for them before you take that to market. Number 3 over here is, again, please keep things simple and helpful for your audience. Give them more examples, offer more training, put videos out there. Again, you want your audience and users to be using your products in a way that it was designed or it was meant for, right? Earlier, I showed you an example of somebody trying to use ChatGPT to find the square root of 4%. You saw the outcome of that, right? It wasn't meant to solve math problems, but somebody came and tried doing that. So again, if your product is meant for a certain use case, certain audience, it behooves you to put that training and fine print out there. All of these that I'm talking about are practices and principles for building AI systems in a responsible way. Okay. I'm the fourth bullet on the left over here. It's what I was just mentioned, something called RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. This is a very, very compelling and proven technique that's out there. There are advanced RAG techniques as well that you have at your disposal to weave in and orchestrate into your solution and your infrastructure to be able to, again, build generative AI experiences and products that are responsible, joyful, beneficial. A quick interesting thing that you could find out there, if you were to look at LLM rankings, you'll find you'll get a bunch of hits from independent think tanks to academia, actually horse racing these LLMs against each other for a specific problem and context. So here's another thing, another useful resource that you can reference when trying to think of which is the LLM that might be most efficient or beneficial or up to snuff for my use case. So again, a lot of tools are available out there. Be smart and informed when you're making a choice and decision on which one might be the most appropriate for me. A lot of other people are doing this testing and evaluation for us. Use that to your advantage. Number 3 is instrumenting observability. Now, observability is an emerging domain. This concept should not be foreign to you, right? When I think of observability, what you might have experienced today in your context, you think you have experienced products like Splunk, like Datadog, like Elk, and you've also, so observability is really about building the sensors and building the eyes and ears inside the system so that that system is not a black box anymore, right? Old school thinking, you go 10, 15 years, we talked about monolith systems, right? Now we're talking about systems that are microservices architecture, which are loosely coupled, right? Back in the days, we had black boxes. Today, we have transparent systems. Observability is really about building systems in a transparent way so that when something breaks down, or even better, when something is showing signs of distress, of anxiety, you have the sensors, you build the eyes and ears in there so that you can catch those early signs of distress and address them. So when I talk about instrumenting observability, that is what I'm asking you to bring into your generative AI context and your domain. Lucky for us, there are a lot of emerging frameworks and packages that you can readily import into your code. One of them is LangKit. It's an open source large language model monitoring toolkit that you can import and start orchestrating into your system so that your engineers and support staff can be more informed in terms of the health and hygiene of your system. On the right, you see a quick screenshot of how that LangKit package has been imported and how that's being used to build certain instrumentation for your support staff and engineers. And again, go back to the basics. I talked about the guardrails. I talked about being able to monitor and measure things like toxicity, doing sentiment analysis. You have to be able to make sure that you are continuously monitoring not just the stack and the health of the system, but also the outcomes of what's happening in terms of how the users are consuming your product. There's this idea of prompt, and I talked about prompt. There's this idea of prompt distribution. Imagine ChatGPT. You've been using ChatGPT for the past 2 months, and you've used it for a number of use cases. Now, let's say you used it 1,000 times. If you could put the distribution of those prompts, how did you end up using ChatGPT? What were those 1,000 prompts that you put in the ChatGPT window? If you were to cluster them, where were they? Were they for education? Were they for health? Were they for travel? Were they for summarization? Were they for text analysis? When you start doing that, you start getting a sense of how a system is being used and whether it's being used in a way that you design it for. So that's another growing practice for ChatGPT like products, where builders are starting to look at the distribution of the prompt and saying, hey, am I seeing prompts showing up that are at the far end of the distribution? And that's where you say, oh, this wasn't what I meant the system to be. And I can then start putting guardrails to block or provide additional training or fine print to make sure that user are not using the system for what it wasn't meant for. You also have to use for, and the last bullet I'd like you to focus on is security and privacy. Again, remember, this data is unstructured. I have no idea how I trained, where this training data came from. There's a chance that you might be serving up somebody's social, somebody's address, and things like that. So be careful. Keep an eye out for those kind of things as well. And the only way you can do that in a scalable way is by making your system observable. Here are some of the dials or the guardrails I was talking about earlier that you can dial up or down as you're building your systems. Toxicity, profanity, firearms, public safety, and they're like at least verdicts. If you go to Bedrock or verdicts, you'll get at least 100 to 150 such guardrail dials that you can set and fine-tune the system for. Fail fast. Again, I think by now, the things I've been touching on, you probably are starting to see that theme, which is like, I'm going to encourage you to really try and break your system on your own. If you're trying to build something out of a garage, get your friends and some of your trusted allies to come and, hey, I built this. Can you try and use it and break it, right? the more of that adversarial testing and break testing on failing fast that you can do upfront, the better off you're going to be going forward, right? And this is something that doesn't stop. You got to do this on an ongoing basis, because the body of content or data that your model was trained on, that is constantly changing, right? So it's not like it's not a fixed set of data that is never going to change, or you have full knowledge of. So failing fast and doing this performance testing and looking for those undesired and unintended edge cases or outcomes is something that you'll have to do and invest on an ongoing basis. So that continuous observing is going to be key. So for you, I would highly encourage, build that instrumentation upfront. Do not go to market, even with the smallest widget, until you've invested in building some level dashboard. It's like you're driving a car. Would you drive a car without a dashboard? I don't think so. Try this small experiment. Take a black piece of paper and put it on your dashboard in the car next time you drive, and try driving down the street around the block. I bet you're going to be nervous, right? Same thing over here, right? These are systems that have a lot of moving parts, a lot of unstructured data. So building that dashboard and maturing that as your system evolves, as you collect more data, is going to be uber important towards building a responsible, trustworthy AI system. Finally, inspect and adapt and adjust. So again, you need that continuous feedback loop, not just from your systems, but also doing those field tests, field surveys, research, going out there, talking to your users, studying these emerging best practices, being at meetups, being a student, learning things. I also encourage you to read some of those early research papers that are out there that started this the LLM sort of field of tools, right? So think of the work, read up the work that was done by the Google Brain, Google Research, Google AI think tanks. And again, they might be a little heavy and dense to read, but I would encourage you to make time to read some of that early thinking, that seminal thinking that happened, which got us to this point. Down to a few final slides. This is just a quick sort of collection of all the ideas that I touched on. My approach that I'm recommending: work backwards, adopt standards, instrument observability, fail fast, and always inspect and adapt for the life of the product or system that you're putting out there. Thank you. One last thing I want to, this is, I don't know if some of you use WhatsApp, but I think Meta was doing some experimenting a few months back, and they were putting different chatbots. One of them was a travel chatbot called Lorena. I tried messing around with that. I've been using WhatsApp for about 10, 12 years now. WhatsApp probably knows my whole history, where I've been, who my friends are. And Lorena failed at this experiment. I said, hey, Lorena, what are the 5 places I've vacationed at? These 5 places are on my bucket list. I haven't been to any of these places. But Lorena just made this up. So again, one final example to raise your guard up. Don't trust what people put out there. Be very mindful of what you're using and what you're trusting.